conversation. My name is Camilla Palestra, and I work as Associate Curator at the Center for Sustainable Fashion. And I am very pleased today to be hosting this new conversation. The series expands on the Art for the Environment residency program, which was launched in 2015 by Professor Lucy Horta, with the aim to explore environmental and social concerns that define the 21st century through art and design. So while the physical residencies were, and to some extent are still on pause because of the COVID-19 restrictions, I thought it would be a valuable moment to invite our partners across the world and UAL students and graduates to share their experiences and discuss how art and design can be catalyst for change in a climate and social emergency. So for those of you who are interested to know more about the Art for the Environment residency program, we can put the link into the chat, and we can also put the link to all the previous conversations that we had and we recorded. So today I'm very pleased. I have the pleasure to be introducing our guest, Veronica Sekules, Director at the GroundWork Gallery in Norfolk, and Rebecca Faulkner, Researcher, Writer, Spatial Practitioner. She's a UAL alumna, and she was the AER 2021 resident at GroundWork Gallery. Veronica has more than 30 years experience working in art galleries. She has curated exhibitions, worked on projects with artists, engaged with schools and the general public, both in the UK and internationally. Her long-term interest in the environment, which informs GroundWork Gallery, stems from a formative period working for Friends of the Earth. As a result of this, she wrote the Friends of the Earth cookbook, published by Penguin Books in 1980. Veronica's main career followed at the Sainsbury Centre for Visual Arts, University of East Anglia, where she was first a curator, then head of education and research and deputy director. Rebecca Faulkner is a self-professed researcher, writer, and recent spatial practitioner graduate from Central St. Martin's. An architect in training who borrows from other disciplines, from spoken word to movement practices, she employs critical writing and performance-based work as a research methodology, ranging from themes around the gendering and governance of public space to the extractive process of finite resource mining. Her performance, The Act of Loitering, A City Awakening, was the first introduction to sand as a medium, in which large wearable sandbags were fabricated to constrain and liberate the female performers' bodies, momentarily gifting stillness in the city. A continued fascination with sand over the past 18 months led to her being the latest recipient of the UAL AER residency hosted by GroundWork Gallery and part of Extraction Art on the Edge of the Abyss. Harnessing the tools of performance, situated drawing, site writing, and warm data collection, she seeks to engage in other ways of doing things, encapsulating complex issues into digestible and emotive formats. I would also like to mention that this conversation is part of a wider event called Carnival of Crisis, which UAL is organizing in response to the climate emergency and to coincide with the COP26 currently taking place in Glasgow. And Rebecca will be also presenting a new intervention as part of the Carnival of Crisis, taking place at the Canopy Market in King's Cross from the 5th to the 7th of November. And finally, just a couple of housekeeping information. Please do keep your camera and mic off so we can have a better streaming. The event will last overall an hour, and there will be, after the presentations, there will be time for Q&A. And you are welcome to use the chat box to put your questions, or raise your hand and ask your question in person if you prefer. And finally, just a reminder that the conversation will be recorded and will be eventually made available on the YouTube channel of the postgraduate community. So now I would hand it over to you, Veronica.
Hello, can you hear and see me? I am very delighted to be here. Thank you very much. This is a wonderful opportunity, and the whole project was a wonderful opportunity for GroundWork Gallery. I'm just going to go straight into my presentation, if I can find it. Share files. Right, is that?
Do you want me to upload it for you, Veronica?
I've got it showing on my side screen. I can't make it go on the main. Thank you. Thank you.
We can see it now.
Okay, good. And now I think I'm off. So GroundWork Gallery is quite a small place in King's Lynn, small in size, but great in ambition. It's the only art gallery specializing in the environment in the country, which is quite surprising. I mean, I've got theories as to why, but so the part of the role is, well, showing contemporary art, 3 exhibitions a year on the whole, and campaigning about the issues that the art raises. This is the first year that I organized a residency program. And this is the first year collaborating with UAL, which was a great opportunity for all of us. So here's the picture of the gallery, and this summer, the project that was the subject of the residency program was Extraction Art on the Edge of the Abyss. Now, this is a massive American project involving about 50 organizations and hundreds of artists across the whole of the United States. Though, as has been pointed out to me, the subject, extraction, in the States is an enormous problem of oil drilling and mining, Alberta tar sands, just terrible environmental issues are raised by extraction of fossil fuels and so forth in the United States. But it's been pointed out to me that the exhibiting institutions, which are dotted on that map of the States, are not the main areas of extraction on the whole. They're the kind of liberal West and East. But the only collaborator outside the States was, you see the map of the UK at the bottom with the dot, is GroundWork Gallery. So that again proved to be the most enormous opportunity for us. And I hope that we're continuing this collaboration with this project, Extraction Art on the Edge of the Abyss, for another year. So because it's such an enormous subject. So we decided to have a residency program as part of this, rather than a straightforward exhibition, because it would involve more activity and investigation and research. However, I didn't want to put pressure on resident artists to see an empty gallery, think, oh my God, I have to fill it. So organized a kind of holding exhibition during the project of work by Darren Almond, Andres Chang, and also the normal jewelry that we have on show. But there you see on the screen the poster listing the artists in residence. There were 3, Caitlin Ferguson, Sean Fraser, and then Rebecca, who you will hear from later, was the University of the Arts London, who won her residency in tremendous competition. And the idea was to show the resident projects on each Saturday, to show the work in progress, and then to have a final exhibition for 2 weeks. and that you see the sign on the wall outside. And here is some a set of prints, photolithographs by Darren Almond that were on show throughout, about Norilsk, nickel mining area in the Arctic, devastated by pollution. I wanted to have some exemplary projects that were global. And that was one of them. And then the other one here, Andres Chang, who was part of the American Extraction Network, showed work about CO2 burial in the oceans. And here he's done drawings on top of documents that were circulated in international meetings, proving that CO2 burial was fixed by international organizations, and they fixed the legislation in order to enable them to do it. So important work from him, and he's remained involved. So I wanted this global projects to be on show, but actually for our project, our residency project had to be based on local issues. So we looked at the whole question of quarrying, and worked with the Norfolk Coast Partnership, who's the area of outstanding natural beauty. They govern that, and it's one of the largest areas that they govern, that they monitor the state of the whole environment along the very extensive Norfolk coast. And I asked them, what are the extractive issues in this region? And they said, well, actually quarrying, sand, silica sand in particular is very controversial and very important, chalk and flint. So that we launched that whole program. This is a chalk quarry at Hillington. And so each artist was given the brief to take a pretty open view about how they were going to investigate. I was going to support them, making introductions to quarries, and we also worked with a geologist who was also our advisor, Tim Holt-Wilson, Norfolk Geodiversity. So he helped us find quarries, and I wrote to them all in advance. So here we are. This is Caitlin Ferguson, who was our first artist in residence, talking to Peter Lemon, who is the chief executive and owner of Middleton Aggregates, which was one of our quarries. And we went 3 times. He gave us 3 incredibly informative introductions to his quarry. And here we are walking around. That's Caitlin walking around. He has, in fact, 4 quarries in different states of development. This was one of the active ones. So as we learnt from him, there isn't a lot of stone in Norfolk. There's relatively poor quality quarrying material, which is used for aggregates, as his name suggests, Middleton Aggregates. So it's used mostly, in his case, in the building trade. And he has cast stone and sand. And here he is talking to Sean Fraser, who was the second artist in residence. And here we are, Pentney Lakes. So this is a quarry that is in half restored. And one thing we learned from Peter Lemon is that once quarries have have a 15-year life of active, 15-year licenses for activity, which then has to be renewed as long as they're active. And they're monitored by planning legislation and also by the Environment Agency. And then they have to have a 5-year period once they've finished of returning the environment to some kind of normality. And we learned from him that 75% of areas of outstanding sites of special scientific interest, triple SIs, are former quarries. So they become very rich biodiverse environments if properly monitored, which in our law they have to be. And that's one of the things we learned, is that our planning legislation in this instance is very effective, as opposed to the United States, where there's pretty much free for all in terms of what people are able to do to the environment. We also had a filmmaker involved. Actually, this is still Sean. This is another quarry we visited, Sibelco Lesiet, outside King's Lynn, which was a silica sand quarry. Silica sand is used in the glass industry. We'll hear more about that, but is the most valuable of all the quarry materials. And in fact, this quarry produces 80% of the silica sand used in the glass industry in this country. And there's a train line direct from it that takes the sand out to all the manufacturing site, all the factories. This is a picture of a chalk quarry with a actually astonishingly beautiful green lake in it, which is produced by the chalk. And here we are with Tim Holt Wilson. In fact, that's Rebecca and Peter Lemon. And here we are at Pentney looking at the lake. I think we're at Pentney there. Rebecca, you might correct me later. But anyway, it was... and Tim Holt Wilson is the man with long legs in the front, who is our geologist, who became quite fascinated in these environments, some of which he knew very well, but some of which he was new to. And Peter Lemon, who's the other man you see in that picture, said he learned more from Tim Holt Wilson in 10 minutes than he'd learned in his 30-year career managing quarries, which made us sit up a bit and think, actually, you know, all this material, aggregates that used in the building industry, it gets thrown into the bottom of buildings, you know, all this ancient geological material without a second thought. And this whole project made us think very carefully about what we're doing with these ancient materials coming out of the earth, and how we're using them casually in everyday life. We probably need to, well, we do need to think very much more carefully about that. And here's Rebecca again on top of the spoil heap at Pentney Lakes. And here we found a load of fossils, which actually did highlight how important and geologically important these materials might be. In commercially, they're thought of as poor quality, but in terms of the earth and what we're digging up out of the earth, they're of absolutely tremendous interest. Here we are back at Sibelco at the silica sand quarry, and here is a pile of sand. This is once it's been through a purification process, and it then gets taken on this gantry over to the railway line. And here's Callum, our filmmaker, at one of the former quarries. And Tim Holt Wilson again with Rebecca and Peter Middleton. Through Tim, we learnt a lot about geology. This is from a former quarry at Blackborough End with extraordinary extrusions of carstone in sand, forming these amazing kind of fossil-like structures. And here is another one embedded in a kind of a carstone fossil embedded in sand. So here's Caitlin. So we'd done all this investigating in all the quarries, and then each artist had the job of making something from it. Again, I said at the beginning, I didn't put any pressure particularly on them. You know, the idea was if they produced something, fine. If they didn't, we already had the work in progress, the findings, the beginnings of the film, all the stones we'd found. There was a lot to show of interest already about the process. But Caitlin was absolutely on fire through the process and did masses of drawings, lots of photographs of film. She was making molds, using biomaterials. She had this whole project kickstarted a whole way of thinking more about the material she found. She already had been interested in geology, and had been interested in flint, but this opened up a whole new range of ideas for her. This is Sean Fraser. Again, he's a glassmaker from the Royal College, initially where he trained. He's shown before at GroundWork Gallery, and showed some, he was interested in the work he showed before in an exhibition called Theories of the Earth. He'd made glass casts of peat workings. He was interested in peat extraction in Scotland. So he came to this residency with a track record of interest in both the material and the environmental implications of taking earth from the land. So you saw him visiting some of the quarries. There he is sitting at the big table in our living area upstairs, and he printed off images from Google Earth of the quarries and became very interested in the shapes caused by the extraction, the impact on the land, and made a series of drawings from that. So there are some of his drawings, and here are some in fact with some of Rebecca's work in the final exhibition. So then Rebecca, well, you'll hear a lot more about her progress, but here she is, a picture of her at Hunstanton, with its extraordinary range of stones, cast stone and chalk side by side. It's a most unique kind of coastal landscape. So she was drawn to that as much as she was to the quarries, but I won't preempt what she has to say. So then we came to the exhibition. So GroundWork Gallery, there's the poster that introduces it inside the building. And on the right there, you see Richard Long's River Ouse river drawing from 2016, which was made from River Ouse mud. So the inaugural exhibition at GroundWork Gallery featured Roger Ackling and Richard Long. And Richard made this mud work specially for it, and it's been there ever since, and was incredibly appropriate for this subject and seems to fit in with every exhibition. But there it occupies a whole wall. So this is Caitlin Ferguson. She ended up, she'd made some very beautiful drawings of flints. She wrote a poem which was written on the wall. You can see on the right there, and in the front is a cast of out of biomaterial of a fragment of text which she wrote when she visited Grimes Graves, which is an ancient flint working mine not far from the gallery. And here's a close-up of some of her flint drawings made again on biomaterial, and a close-up of her, well, you can just see a close the sunlight streaming on her poem. Here's a visitor showing, this is looking into the rest of the gallery, where you see Darren Allman's pictures on the right and the big display case there. And in there we showed examples of different stones and notes from Tim Holt Wilson and from each of the artists. To the left of the case, you see some of Caitlin's experiments with making casts. I think on the right, you can just begin to see some of Rebecca's findings, her special stones. She wrote a poem too, and her stone that's breathing in a polythene bag, showing how it is a living material. I'm sure she might say more about that. So again, I won't dwell on this because you're going to hear from Rebecca, but I'm putting this up because she actually, I don't think, saw this final result of her display. So here is her incredible, detailed, wonderful mind map about sand, which was put on the wall. And there you see, there it is on the left, and then the whole bank of separate images made from it as individual sheets, which I didn't frame them, Rebecca. I put them up with skiffies, which is a wonderful, almost invisible method for holding them on the wall. And there you can see, this is Rebecca's area upstairs, her display table with photographs and her microscope and the images on the wall. And she also did a kind of film of quarry images, a moving image, and here's the still of those. Her collection of wonderful photographs, all taken in spectacularly lovely weather. And here is her microscope made from which you can use with your phone, and was very well used and explored by people. And there's another image of it there, a better picture taken by Callum. And this is my sort of final image and final word. So here we are, this is really a comparison of an image of one of our quarries. I think this is Pentney on the top left, and an image by one of the American artists of a burning landscape in the States, oil being burnt off. And I suppose the contrast between what we found, which was a relatively benign impact in terms of planning on the land, although these quarries can be seen from space, but they have a limited lifespan and then do return to nature. The permanent impact on the land is, I suppose, more invisible in that material has undoubtedly been taken away, but the land is not permanently damaged. Whereas in other parts of the world, we see much, much more severe permanent damage, with which we're not unconnected. You know, we import materials from different parts of the world where practices are not so carefully regulated. So and I'm sure Rebecca will say more about this, one has to take a world view of extraction industries and really think carefully about how the impact has to be considered and how that what impact that has on our practices of building and consumption. I think I'm going to leave it there and hand over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Veronica. Very impressive projects, and hopefully there will be a bit of time for a Q&A to elaborate a bit more on certain aspects, also regarding the partnership with this American project and your findings and learnings. But I would hand it over to Rebecca straight away, so we can have time at the end for a conversation. Rebecca.
Hello, sorry, just also going to start sharing my screen. Hopefully, yes, you can all see. Hi, I'm Rebecca. As Camilla mentioned, I'm the most recent AER resident, and I'm also a very recent graduate from the Spatial Practices Programme at Central St Martin's. Yeah, so I'm going to start by giving a bit of context about my specific interest in sand extraction, which I feel relate to the way in which I practice. A lot of what I do is about revealing invisible processes. So I'm hoping through this very short talk, you'll learn a bit about sand and how it's being extracted globally and locally and sort of what those implications are. And I think whilst it's important to frame it within the sort of larger artistic context, we have to think about the implications of extraction from a built environment perspective, which is mainly, you know, these things are being extracted to process for the construction industry. And 18 months ago, sand was a particulate I paid pretty much no attention to. When I thought of it, I would conjure up images of beaches and coastlines. I knew it was important to the construction industry, but I didn't know how much it had transformed the modern world as we know it. So every grain of sand is the slow erosion of mountains, rocks, or other hard organisms into increasingly smaller fragments. And geologists formally define sand as a particulate between 0.625 and 2 millimeters. Anything smaller is considered silt, and anything bigger is considered gravel. And in many ways, a single grain of sand is a snapshot of time. It's the mute record of former mountains, rocks, rivers, deserts, and millions of years of the Earth's history. And if you were to fill a cup with sand, the likelihood is it would be a mix of feldspar and quartz, because they're the two most abundant minerals within the Earth's crust. And quartz is sometimes referred to as silica or silicon dioxide. And silica sand is great for construction purposes because it's relatively inert, there's loads of it, and therefore they sort of lock together in a good way for making concrete. But this wonderful granular material is kind of in everything. It's transformed the modern world. So from asphalt to abrasives, bricks, clay, concrete, elastics, filtration systems, fracking, glass, microchips, metal casting, molds, mortar, oil spill cleanup, paint, plastic, sandbags, sandpaper, and even toothpaste, to the computer that you're watching this talk on, the sort of glass screen, the silicon chip inside it, the fiber optic supplying your internet, probably the concrete and bricks around you, all of that is made possible by sand. And in this sense, sand can be seen as a metaphor for modern day consumption. Currently, we are using up the renewable resources of 1.7 Earths, and unless things change, we're going to need the equivalent of 3 by 2050. And sand is the most abundant resource on Earth other than air and water, but we're running out, harnessing grains at a faster rate than they naturally erode. And the most significant driver of this is arguably the concrete industry, the demand for which is growing exponentially. The UN estimates that 4.1 billion tons of cement are produced every year, and every ton emits up to 622 kilograms of carbon dioxide, approximately 7% of global CO2 emissions. And the worldwide price of construction sand has increased by 50% in the last decade. Sand is super heavy as well, so every mile that it has to travel, its price increases significantly. And globally, we are now consuming 50 billion metric tons of sand and gravel every year, which is about 18 kilograms per person per day, which incidentally is the weight of an optimally filled sandbag. And sand is mined from lakes, riverbeds, beaches, the ocean floor, and even sometimes from sandstone. In the process, it destroys habitats, it kills land and marine life, it clouds and pollutes water, it stops the protective nature of beaches and dunes, it causes floods and erosion of the coastline, it creates tiny harmful dust particles that damage human lungs, it creates inhospitable environments for human life, it creates sand mafias that fight, threaten and kill over sand, and it forces people to flee their land. This list goes on, and it's all because of human demand. Since the mid-2000s, we've seen the rise in illegal sand mining globally. In the last decade in India, which ranks second after China in its use of construction sand, they've seen at least 70 people violently murdered or harmed by sand mafias. These victims include journalists, activists, and police officers, as well as farmers whose land has been stolen for the purposes of illegal mining. But this problem is not exclusive just to India. Illegal mining takes place all over the world, in places like Kenya, Morocco, Algeria, Crimea, Malaysia, Indonesia, Cambodia, Singapore, and Jamaica. And even though in the UK we have a National Planning Policy Framework, which was published earlier in July 2021, they actively promote the continued use of minerals to provide the infrastructure for buildings, energy, and goods that the country needs. To me, it seems that the UK government's approach is to create policy or material considerations founded on economy rather than environmental or social sustainability. The long-term conservation and continued use of finite resources seems contradictory, not taking into consideration how we are using many of these resources at a much faster rate than they are naturally being eroded, let alone the chemical treatment, washing, and processing it often has to go through to be viable for construction processes. So for the past year, I've been lingering outside a sand and aggregates wharf in southeast London. I've been trying to understand sand in the city in relation to London, But one thing that's been really difficult through COVID and many other things is to sort of get beyond the other side of the wall. And I suppose the AER residency was the first opportunity for me to finally be on the side of industry. So I'm very grateful that all of this research that I had done sort of on my master's at Central St. Martin's then got to be put to use in a real context per se. So as Veronica mentioned, we visited a lot of quarries, and the first week for me was mainly spent visiting quarries which were either in operation or disbanded. So here again we have Middleton Aggregates in East Bilney, run by Peter Lemon. I suppose one of the things that amazed me more than anything else is the landscape. It's much more desert-like than the Norfolk I know. I actually grew up in Norfolk, incidentally, so it was a real great opportunity to return to my home county, albeit a slightly different part of my home county, and understand this sort of more industrial and extractive place. And it was kind of here that I first witnessed the deposits, the iron deposits, which colour much of the sand and sandstone in the area. Again, I had no idea Norfolk had once been so iron rich. And we were sort of transported in this huge truck around this foreign landscape, and it was amazing to see how much oxide was bonded to sand and cast stone, and how much of it has to be extracted, especially on the Sibelco sand quarry, because they need to have much purer sand. So despite geographically occupying a much larger terrain, Middleton processes 700,000 tonnes of sand in aggregate compared to the 2.8 million tonnes I was seeing on the wharf in London. And they also deal in construction waste recycling. And the most popular material which is sold back to the industry is called Type 1 crushed concrete, which becomes hardcore and generally is an infill material for roads, or it's placed under the confines of the building foundations. And it's commonly used as a replacement for granite or limestone, because there's limited availability within Norfolk, but also it's incredibly expensive, and it does the same job, but it has a much more workable rate. But I must admit, as I marvelled at these former building elements, I did start to wonder, could we be using construction waste better? So with up to 300,000 new homes needed a year in the UK, there's clearly an enormous demand for construction materials. And 2.6 billion bricks will be used this year alone, 600 million of which are imports. And alongside this, we have EU legislation, meaning that 70% of building materials need to be recycled and zero to landfill. Waste handlers can provide inert material, which can then be turned into things like bricks and tiles and sold back to the industry. And as mentioned by Veronica, I was also fascinated by these fossils. So this is Black Breton clay pit, and you can see expert geologist Tim Holt-Wilson in the background again. And he was telling me that this is rich in bitumens, but absolutely useless for making bricks. And this clay here is predominantly used as a clay capping on waste piles. So it isolates the underlying waste to stop any water infiltration. And I took a sample of this clay with ammonites back to the gallery. You can see it here, and I immediately started to think about how this specimen is a metaphor for how we think of these materials as being inert and therefore ripe for our taking, but their chemical composition continues to shift and change. They are living and breathing just as we are. Also, on the residency, I visited this amazing geological phenomena, which is the Hunstanton Cliffs. I traversed the length of this beach, exploring the layers of time laid to rest 93 to 112 million years ago, when this land was at the bottom of the ocean. So all of this was laid underwater. At the top, you have the white chalk, which is about 99 million years ago. The purity of it suggests that it was laid down far from land because there's no debris staining it, and it's mainly prehistoric plankton. Below that, you have red chalk, which was 99 to 108 million years ago, very rare limestone. The coloration comes from the presence of limonite, which is a type of iron. And below that, we have karstone, which was 108 to 112 million years ago. And these sand particles are bonded together with iron oxide, which gives it the sort of gingerbread, ruddy, rusty coloration. And then amongst this, we also find Anthropocenic boulders, former pavers, walls, slabs resting on the shore. They're the sort of silent records of our human-centric ways, sand and gravel bound together with cement, waiting to be eroded down to grain. The material make up a new geological phenomena. It's a strangely liminal place between cliff and grain. And when it comes to sand, the value is often seen in economic terms. Extraction trumps keeping it in the system for things like climate resilience in coastal areas. Across the globe, beaches are disappearing either from being illegally stolen or from offshore dredging causing beaches to collapse into the sea. And beaches are protective. Dunes, for instance, can stop flooding and further erosion of the coastline. And the encroaching sea level due to climate change and shrinking beaches is a serious problem, and one that Norfolk is all too familiar with. So further around the coast in places like Bacton and Wilcott, there's a project where millions of tons of sand were dredged to nourish or replenish a beach and hold back the encroaching sea. In fact, I think it was 2 million cubic meters of sand were placed along a 6-kilometer stretch of coast to create this new barrier. But all of this sand being pumped onto the beach disturbs marine life, it clouds water, it potentially creates phosphates which can contaminate seawater. It buries life forms on the beach, which despite their size are actually fundamental to ecosystems. And much of this is only temporary. The nourishment around the corner in Bacton and Wilcott is only expected to last 15 years. And these are just some of the beautiful samples of things which can be found on Hunstanton. And again, as Veronica mentioned, I was also able to visit Sibelco Sand Quarry and was kindly shown around by Alan Bland, who's the quarry supervisor. He's worked there for 36 years, which is a long time. Again, it feeds the glass manufacturing industry. And what was quite fascinating was that they were impossible to stop. It was impossible for them to stop during COVID because once a glass furnace starts burning, it can't stop burning for 10 to 15 years. So it was requiring this constant silica sand being sent to them for processing. And they suggested that about 20 years, this quarry will last for about 20 years. And it's one lone digger working for 11 hours a day, non-stop, with 4 vehicles coming to him capable of holding 44 tons of sand. They then transport that sand to the quarry to be processed. And this takes about 12 minutes to go from quarry to processing. And that's also happening for 11 hours. So 10,000 tons of sand are excavated every day. And the sand needs to be 98% pure silica sand. And as you can tell, well, maybe you can't, but the coloration suggests the presence of iron. So it has to be sieved and then classified, treated, floated, and electromagnetically separated to liberate the iron, as they say. And 3,690 tons of sand are processed every day. And the whole place reeks of sulfur and sodium hydrosulfate, which, funny enough, the sodium hydrosulfite can actually spontaneously combust when it's wet. So the week that I spent visiting quarries was rather a sensory experience. It was more than just visual. I was continually confronted by that putrid smell of sulfur, which is very musty and peaty and earthy. In the working quarries, my lungs were filled with dust. My body and my boots brought home remnants of all of these places. I clambered onto machinery like the one you see in this picture, where I was literally vibrated, washed and sieved like a piece of aggregate. And I scaled piles of rubble, which made me feel fossils shifting underfoot. But I suppose what I found most striking about the experience was this notion of time. How if we begin to understand the rhythms of the Earth's deep past, it can be revelatory, and it started to provoke my thought on how we can shift towards a more sustainable future. The environment I found myself in intersected everything from deep time to a millisecond, millennia of migrating grains and shifting sands unearthed in a matter of moments, to be processed over a number of months, to be reconstituted in new Anthropocenic materials, only to be demolished, crushed, and graded as infill. As humans, we are replicating geological processes, but on a much shorter timescale. Instead of waves pushing bodies of silica millennia ago, we use diggers and washers and lorries and mixers to haul grains across the world and to form new lands, to bind them in legions of concrete and asphalt, and to melt them down and to purify them so that we can see. In my visits to the 2 working quarries, I had expected to find scarred landscapes and bad practices. However, as Veronica mentioned, we were shocked to learn that the land restoration process of decommissioned quarries actually leads to more biodiversity. And as Alan Bland put it to me, quarrying methods have not changed, but the politics have. Before a spade can even go in the ground, companies must agree on the reclamation plan with the local council and the landowner. However, we cannot negate that what this energy consumptive industry feeds into on a global scale. Sand mining is the world's largest mining endeavour, responsible for 85% of all mineral extraction. It is also the least regulated globally and quite possibly the most corrupt and environmentally destructive. However, in the UK, even if we have UK regulations which protect and restore land, globally non-human life is damaged, land and people continue to be exploited. So just going to finish off by talking about my DIY microscope, which was very cheap and easy to make. It's a reappropriated laser lens embedded into a perspex screen, and with these washers and the perspex here, you can move the specimen up and down. And if I stop sharing now and reshare, I'm just going to show a short clip from a film that I made with my DIY microscope called Microgeologies. Hopefully, can you all see that? If you can't.
It's not sharing at the moment, Rebecca.
Right, sorry. Is that sharing now?
Not yet. Are you sharing the
Okay,
screen?
I'll post a link and people can watch it in their own time. But it's just a sort of fascinating way of looking at the sort of miniature landscapes that which all of these small samples and grains harbour, and you sort of look at the much bigger human and earth scale, but there are landscapes within landscapes within landscapes. And yeah, that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rebecca, and yeah, apologies for this issue with video sharing. Unfortunately, Blackboard Collaborate is not really friendly in this sense. But thank you for posting the link. Wonderful presentation, really dense and fascinating research. I would ask Veronica to join us for a Q&A and see if we only have 10 minutes left. If there's any questions from the participants, the attendees, please use the chat box, or also raise your hand and ask your question in person if you want. So yes, impressive work. I have a question for you to start with, Rebecca. I mean, if you can, I'm curious to know more how you approach sand as your subject, and in a way, if sand is also becoming a kind of a methodology for your research. And you mentioned the sense of time, which comes from your research of sand, which is influencing how you approach your work, your research. And it will be a central element of your presentation now during the Carnival of Crisis, which is resulting from your research conducted during the residency at GroundWork. So yes.
A lot of questions. So I really stumbled upon sand accidentally, as sort of mentioned in the introduction. When I first came to Central St. Martin's, we were really encouraged to try different ways of practicing architecture or researching the sort of spatial implications of how the city is conceived. And a lot of this was through performative work, looking at how historic laws and legacies affect the way in which we feel in public space. And I was looking specifically at women in public space and the notion of loitering, which I know doesn't tend to affect most women. It tends to be young Black men, but there are nuances, and it relates to sort of stillness in the city. And this performance act of loitering was a way of reclaiming it. And I utilized sandbags because in this time I was also very interested in the way in which we are instructed in the city, but also looking at sort of temporary street infrastructure. And every time you see new works being done on a road, or all of the widening of pavements which happened for social distancing in COVID, you have these elements which allow for that, but what you don't tend to see is the sandbags which are weighting it down. And through these sort of loitering city sculptures, as I like to refer to them, I started this investigation into sand to understand how sort of precious it is as a commodity, and how it's, I mean, it seems really dull, but I'm incredibly fascinated with it, and understanding that, you know, from it's been utilized throughout human history for many, many years. It was the first way that we even created roads, and it's being used from everything from glass manufacturing to concrete manufacturing, which is the most predominant way in which it's used, but also it's being dredged up and creating new lands, like in places like Dubai, they're creating literal new islands out of sand. So I suppose that was my introduction into sand, and from that I based myself on a sand dredging wharf and in southeast London, and became very fascinated with this tension between moving away from, I'll call them dirty and polluting industries, but whilst retaining productive activity in the city. And sand was my introduction into that. So we can't stop using sand right now. It's impossible. That would be a ridiculous thing for me to say. But I hope that in sort of talking about it and understanding both the local and global implications on the land, but also on people and on the environment, everyone here today will go away thinking about it differently and see how precious it is. And a lot of this research was done desk space and also being on the quarry, the wharf in London. And when I saw the opportunity for the residency, I actually felt like someone had written it for me. It was almost too perfect. And I really wanted to go in and be challenged about some of the notions that I had. I think the biggest challenge to my thoughts and my thinking was the restoration process. Like Veronica, I kind of expected to see horrible, bad practices, and we didn't really see any of that. But again, as I've said, we can't not think about the sort of global implications of sand mining, and the sort of use of concrete in the West arguably has meant that when other countries have started a construction boom and they've seen how much we've utilized it, it's been the go-to material. So even if what we're doing here isn't so bad, we still have a legacy of how we've been using it and highlighting it as a product to be used, because it's so easy and cheap. You don't really have to be highly skilled to pour concrete. So, you know, it's a wonderful material, but it's very environmentally problematic. So I'm rambling. And yeah, so it was difficult to sort of showcase all of this at the end of the residency, because my residency ended as the sort of gallery exhibition started. And hopefully in the canopy market from the 5th to the 7th, I'm creating a sand store, and the idea behind this is a material exchange. And on the residency, something that I hadn't really thought about before was this geological time and this idea of materials being shifting and migrating and constantly being swapped. And you know, on Sibelco, the sand used to go up to Yorkshire and they bring coal down, and there's something really poetic in this. So in my sand store, you can come learn more about sand, and I will be gifting sand as well, sort of selling it. But in order for it to be sold, you have to bring a material to me. So the idea is that the sand pile depletes and the other materials equate, and it's meant to be revelatory and start to talk about these invisible processes. It's performative and informative. I hope that was clear.
Thank you, Rebecca. We only have, yes, Veronica.
Yeah, I just want to contribute something. I mean, firstly, Rebecca, thank you so much for your really wonderful work and your fascinating presentation. And I'm so pleased that the residency enabled you to develop ways of thinking you already had. And yes, we found actually very careful practice in the industries we encountered. But nevertheless, certainly Peter Lemon, who was our most consistent informant, was concerned himself about what happens when we run out of sand. And as somebody has pointed out, what's the recent ongoing sand shortage? I mean, there's the pressure on the building trade is so extreme at the moment that no one's got any aggregates to spare, and the current supply has been exhausted and they can't quarry it fast enough. And what happens when we run out? They'll have to start dredging the sea. They're already dredging the sea, and the mine, that is the most terrible prospect, because that really underlines how we are damaging our earth through what we're constructing from it. And that's a sort of paradox. And as Rebecca says, we've really got to think about why we're building the way we do and what we're using in order to do so, and be more considered about it. And also our roads and things that are just shoved under our feet. Our existence does depend on extraction, but we really have to be more considered about what the impact is on the environment.
Absolutely, and this kind of response to the question from Emma about the ongoing sand shortage, and there's a message from Christopher suggesting Lucy Lippard's book, Undermining a White Right Through Land Use, Politics and Art. We need to conclude here. I just wanted maybe briefly to you, Veronica and Rebecca, as curator, gallery directors, and artist, practitioner, dealing with issues. And here I think it's very interesting the angle you're taking through extraction or extractivism into the discourse around climate emergency and natural and human resources. So how do you position your work and yourself within this discourse, and how do you see an impact or an effect or an affect of what you do into these larger, wider conditions we live in?
Just quickly, I just put in the chat, Culture Declares Emergency. We did an event with Culture Declares Emergency, and everyone should sign up for that. But these things are absolutely interconnected. We have to combine, in my view, that's what the whole reason why I run the gallery as an environmentally concerned one. One has to act on what artists are showing us, and we have to collaborate together and work across disciplines, and that's incredibly important, that there's some follow through from what people like Rebecca are showing us and discovering, and showing us in entirely new ways. There has to be follow through to the kind of people like the quarry owners who will know how to act on it. We have to work together.
And also built environment professionals need to understand when they specify a project, they need to understand the passport, what land has been touched by that, and which people too. It's affecting lives globally. And I think for me personally, I'm so fascinated in this subject that I feel the way in which I can practice is by trying to make other people passionate about it, because most people don't give sand a second thought. So I hope that everyone today is just being provoked into thinking about it differently. And it's a small action, but if everyone were to go away today and learn something and tell other people, it will hopefully have a ripple effect that's maybe a bit idealistic, but I do think conversation and making emotive, talking emotively about these things is really important.
Can I just quickly, there's a comment there, how do we approach climate emergency across our specialties as designers? There are so many ways in which to do that in practical terms, like looking at supply chains, you know, the implications of what we've been talking about, looking at being considered in the use of materials, and being less wasteful. Don't look at using waste constructively. Look at the practices of, you know, construction waste. Find new ways to use construction waste, for example, and all kinds of waste materials. Look at a replacement for bubble wrap. That's what I'd love. So in the art world, so much bubble wrap gets used. I mean, that's not really, well, perhaps that is a design issue, but anyway, I think, yeah.
Yes, fantastic. I'm afraid we need to conclude here. We don't have time to carry on, but I urge you to go and see Rebecca's intervention from Friday to Sunday at the Cannabis Market in King's Cross. You can have extended conversations about sand and the project and beyond it. So thank you again, Veronica and Rebecca. Thank you to the postgraduate community team for supporting the event. And also just to say that we are very happy to continue the collaboration with the GroundWork Gallery for next year AER Art for the Environment program. Details will be announced shortly, but yeah, looking forward to the next phase of the partnership and the next project. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.